Welcome back, everyone. This is Charlie. They just released a bunch of scenes for the new Spider-Man Madam Web movie that they're filming. We also learned a lot about several versions of Spider-Man from the multiverse that'll be in the movie, like many versions of Spider-Man. So I'll explain what's going on, because a character like Madam Web, just in general, is like the next big step towards true live-action Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse. Spider-Man No Way Home was about as close as you could get to that up to this point with Tobey Maguire Spider-Man and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man and their villains coming into the MCU, but you can see how they're trying to build towards a more legit live-action Spider-Verse movie. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. Of course, I'll do more Spider-Man videos as we get more details about the movie. Obviously, we have Spider-Man 4 they're working on with Tom Holland behind the scenes. That's going to be a couple years before that happens. That's why it wasn't on the Marvel Phase 5 or Marvel Phase 6 schedules. Just because Tom Holland recently left social media just to take time for himself away, there's probably going to be about 3 years between Spider-Man No Way Home and Spider-Man 4. But while that's going on, you have all these other Spider-Man films that Sony and Marvel are working on. Kevin Feige does help them with some of the movies. Some movies like Morbius, for instance, Kevin Feige not involved with quite so much. It is definitely not Morbin time. But I will explain how all these are connected, because Sony and Marvel like trying to keep all this as connected as possible without lumping too much on the MCU. Like, some of it will be connected to the MCU, and some of it will be like Sony doing stuff on their own. Most of the Madam Web movie seems like it takes place about 20 years ago in the early 2000s, just based on all the Easter eggs and the technology in all the scenes that they've been filming that we saw. And people are starting to think of it as like a Spider-Man movie with a Terminator-style plot, based on the characters like a version of Dr. Octopus or like another Sinister Six character in the future, sending someone back in time to kill Peter Parker's Spider-Man before he's born. So I know there's lots of questions about which version of Peter Parker we're talking about, which Earth does this take place on. I believe this is meant to take place on the same Earth as the Venom and the Morbius movies, just because it's taking place in the Marvel Sony universe primarily, and they want most of their movies to take place on the same Earth. Like, they've already clarified that all the Venom movies and the Morbius movies take place on the same Earth, it's just that this is taking place much earlier in the timeline. Dakota Johnson is playing Cassandra Webb, a version of Madam Web in the movie, or a version of Spider-Woman, depending on how you think about her. She's had many different names in the comics. So if we're talking about Terminator plot with Spider-Man characters, she'd be like the Kyle Reese type of figure trying to save Peter Parker's mother to help him be born eventually, while she's pregnant with him.
I'm Reese, Sergeant TechCom, BN 38416, assigned to protect you. You've been targeted for termination.
Emma Roberts is supposed to be playing a version of Mary Parker, Peter Parker's mother. You can see she's pregnant while they're filming scenes. It sounds like she's pregnant with Peter Parker while this is happening. That's why we're talking about Terminator plot here, because during the Terminator movie, the Terminator tried to come back to kill Sarah Connor so that she could not eventually give birth to John Connors. Like I said, the movie takes place primarily in the New York City area about 20 years ago. That's why all the sets, the cabs, the Palm Pilots, the 3G internet connection all over the place, the Beyonce picture, all seems like it come from the early 2000s. They'll use a lot of CG in the backgrounds here to tune things so that it just seems even more like the early 2000s, like we're talking about the same era as the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. We also see a version of the Daily Bugle truck with the dailybugle.com, like the web address, in front of the 4-Star Diner. That's also from the Spider-Man comics. Even though the logo seems a little bit different, they've sort of mixed and matched a lot of the Daily Bugle logos across Spider-Man films. Like, they might explain the Daily Bugle logo changed a little bit over the past 20 years, because if this takes place on the same Earth as the Venom movies, we saw in Venom Let There Be Carnage that they have a version of Tobey Maguire's Daily Bugle logo. We also know that Sony isn't great when they're mixing and matching a lot of Easter eggs, and they don't always have like a super solid plan for how they're going to connect all these Easter eggs. So even if this is on the same Earth and some of the logos and some of the Easter eggs don't seem like they completely match up with what's happening in the future in the Venom movies, for instance, don't worry about that. That's mostly Sony just mixing things up, kind of like they did when they released the original Morbius trailers. And the 4-Star Diner from the Spider-Man comics is just like a 1950s style diner that Peter Parker and his friends hung out at while they were in college. So this would just be the diner earlier in the timeline in the early 2000s. But in this scene here, you can see Dakota Johnson's Cassandra Webb, Madam Web, wearing Julia Carpenter's comic book outfit, like the jacket here, right out of the comic book look. Sydney Sweeney is actually supposed to be playing Julia Carpenter, I believe. So she might give Julia the jacket later in the movie, because in the comics, eventually Madam Web basically passes all of her powers to Julia. This is just meant to confirm the look they're going with for her character, at least at the beginning of the movie, because when most people think of Madam Web, they think of the older Madam Web from the Spider-Man The Animated Series episodes, or from Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, which itself is a Spider-Verse game. Then in a bunch of other scenes, you see Cassandra Webb with Adam Scott's character, who's reportedly playing a young version of Uncle Ben Parker, dressed as EMTs, saving people at a car wreckage where one is falling off a bridge. Everybody's been wondering since Andrew Garfield Spider-Man the next time we're going to see a version of Uncle Ben, because they kind of skipped over that during the MCU Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. Later you can see that same ambulance driving past the news truck. This says Daily Globe on the side. That's also from the Spider-Man comics. The Daily Globe was just like a rival news organization for the Daily Bugle. Like, the Daily Bugle was not the only news organization in the New York City area in the Spider-Man comics. Then you see Emma Roberts' character pregnant. Like I said, she's reportedly playing a version of Mary Parker, Peter Parker's mother, pregnant with him. She's Uncle Ben's sister-in-law. Peter Parker's father, Richard Parker, was Uncle Ben's biological brother, so that's the connection. So theoretically, someone from the future, like another Sinister Six villain, and if we're talking about the villain that I think that we're talking about, it'd be a version of Dr. Octopus from the future behind this, sending someone back in time to stop Peter Parker Spider-Man from being born. Just because of all the things he'll do in the future when he becomes Spider-Man. One of Madam Web's main abilities, and this might be the way she figures out what her powers are at the beginning of the movie, depending on where she picks up in the timeline, is clairvoyance, prescience, and the ability to sense others and when changes to the timeline are happening. Because it does seem like there's a lot of crazy time travel stuff happening in this movie. And even though we don't have footage of the others yet, the other versions of Spider-Man and Spider-Woman, I guess you could say in the movie, are Sydney Sweeney, like I said, who's playing a version of Julia Carpenter, who becomes a version of Spider-Woman eventually. She also becomes a version of Madam Web, taking the mantle from the original Madam Web. Celeste O'Connor is supposed to be playing a version of Maddie Franklin. She became another version of Spider-Woman eventually. Then Isabella Merced is playing a version of Anya Corazon, who is a version of Spider-Girl in the comics. The way she got her powers is that another hunter who was part of a group called the Spider Society granted her powers using a ritual. Her Spider-Man powers are just like a little bit different, but very similar to Spider-Man's. Like, she can grow an exoskeleton, but for the most part they're similar to Peter Parker Spider-Man's powers. Now, there is a separate Jessica Drew Spider-Woman movie that Sony is working on right now, but that's like a completely separate thing. I don't know if she's also going to have a crossover in this movie, since they've been saying that most of these movies take place on the same Earth as the Venom movies. There's some reports and speculation that the villain of the movie, and if we're calling this like a Madam Web Spider-Man Terminator type of movie, that the Terminator of this equation, like the villain of the film, will be a version of Charlotte Witter, who's Madam Web's granddaughter in the comics, like from later in the timeline, who eventually gets Spider-Man-based powers from Dr. Octopus in the future. So I guess if the movie is adapting a version of this comic story, like if they're really doing it, then Dr. Octopus in the future technically would be the real villain, which would make sense. For those of you asking which version of Peter Parker Spider-Man is this, like that's a big question too, because we're all wondering if they're going to be building up to a version of Spider-Man. They literally referenced it during the Morbius movie post-credit scene. Who is it going to be? They might say that it's a totally new actor playing the character just because of when it takes place in the timeline and the year of Peter Parker's birth. Like if it's the early 2000s and he's like just about to be born. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, for example, was a teenager already getting his powers when this movie is supposed to be taking place, and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is only slightly younger than that. So I'm assuming it's not either of their versions of Peter Parker. Sony does want to bring both Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield back in the future. Like, we've had all kinds of theories about them bringing Andrew Garfield back. But I think they also are trying to find a way to connect with the MCU movies as much as possible, like so they can use Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man, because technically Sony owns the character and they have this big sharing arrangement with Marvel. And technically the age of this Peter Parker Spider-Man in the Madam Web movie would be similar to the age of Tom Holland's Peter Parker, just given his age in Captain America Civil War when he gets his powers in the timeline. So they might be trying to say that this version of Mary Parker is giving birth to Tom Holland's Peter Parker Spider-Man, or one that looks like him. But that's just an early theory right now. They could just as easily say it's like a completely different actor playing the character. But when we talk about larger crossover, like larger Spider-Man plans in the MCU and the Sony movies, we have Avengers 5, Kang Dynasty, and Avengers 6, Secret Wars, very big multiverse-based movies. We also know they eventually plan on crossing Tom Hardy's Venom over with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. They had that post-credit scene where he left a piece of the Venom symbiote, setting up a big symbiote saga, starting with Spider-Man 4 with Tom Holland in the MCU. What they might do with this next symbiote saga in the MCU, though, is culminate it in Avengers 6 Secret Wars. Like, during Secret Wars, he'll be in the Venom costume, and they'll try to do as many classic Spider-Man Secret Wars alien costume Easter eggs as possible. Spider-Man originally got the Venom symbiote during the 1980s version of Secret Wars, which was a different storyline from the one they're going to be doing in the MCU. But he had damaged his normal costume, so he went to repair it using this alien technology, and it basically gave him the Venom symbiote. So a lot of what was happening during that initial Venom storyline is eventually going to be happening in the MCU, just a slightly different way that it all comes together just because of the way they're doing the movies. But everybody post all your theories in the comments below. What do you think is going on during this Madam Web movie with this Terminator, Peter Parker, Spider-Man type of plot, and how they're going to pay out the symbiote saga in Secret Wars eventually? Big reminder that She-Hulk episodes are starting. My She-Hulk episode 1 video is going to post next. Make sure you enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss that. There's supposed to be a pretty epic post-credit scene for episode 1, but there are post-credit scenes in every single episode and just all kinds of Easter eggs and references, so there'll be a lot of zooming and enhancing. Everyone click here for my new Loki Season 2 first look video, and click here for my new She-Hulk trailer video and Easter eggs. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.